This morning I want to open up by talking to you about three presidents in our history, and the three presidents pictured above me are regarded by most historians as the greatest of our presidents in American history. There are some dispute on that, but if you look at the majority of polls by professional academics and historians, these three are ranked at the top. And depending on which list you look at, they all jockey for number one or number two or whatever. But the interesting thing, if you look at what all three of these guys have in common, and certainly they have different views and beliefs and different things, but if you look at what they all three have in common, one quality is wisdom. Wisdom. And two of these three presidents, in fact, did not have much formal schooling. George Washington had very little formal schooling, as did Mr. Lincoln. In fact, both of them were sometimes sneered at and made fun of because of their lack of intelligence. Abraham Lincoln was called a buffoon, and that was by a member of his own cabinet. And so Lincoln sometimes was ridiculed for his lack of intelligence, and yet Lincoln and Washington had great wisdom, and that's what enabled them to become effective presidents. I'm here to tell you that if you want to be successful in life, if you want to be successful in life on a practical level, in your marriage, as a parent, financially, in terms of maintaining a home, in terms of job, career, you must have wisdom. Wisdom is critical. And that's going to be our theme in this series. Solomon writes, "Wisdom is the principal thing. Therefore, get wisdom. And in all you're getting, get understanding." Wisdom is the principal thing, the main thing. And so our series, starting off this month, is Walking in Wisdom, Life Lessons from the Book of Proverbs. If you have not yet read the book of Proverbs, you are missing out on a tremendous blessing. The book of Proverbs is the most practical book in the Bible, and it deals with every single issue that we all encounter on a daily basis. The book of Proverbs deals with faith, it deals with trust, it deals with relationships, it deals with what other people we should trust and what people we should not trust. It deals with issues of business and money and savings and debt. It deals with marriages and parenting. Proverbs deals with just about every area of our lives. And it's astonishing to me that many Christians have not read the book of Proverbs. And it's right there. And my challenge to all of you this year is I would hope that you would do what my pastor taught me, and that is to read through the book of Proverbs every month. If you could just read a chapter of the book of Proverbs a day, then you will pretty much read the entire book every single month. And I like the saying, a chapter of Proverbs a day helps keep foolishness away. And so I encourage you to read the book of Proverbs. Now, we all know that there are lots of challenges in life, and there's a lot of pain in life. And we know that sometimes that pain comes from the devil, and sometimes that pain comes from the Lord testing us, and sometimes that pain comes from the sin of other people. But let's be honest, sometimes we cause our own pain. Sometimes we make foolish choices and decisions, and we mess up our own lives. I have talked with some people in the past, and sometimes they'll be saying, I guess the Lord's testing me right now. And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, no, the Lord's trying to show you how foolish you've been right now. I don't say that out loud, and if I do, I say it nicely. But the Lord has a way of letting us reap what we sow. And if you don't want to experience pain in your life, one good way is to make sure that you make the right choices in life, that you be smart about life. And so, therefore, Proverbs is written for that purpose. And I want to look at a little bit about what wisdom means here. And so we'll look in the opening lines of Proverbs chapter 1, and we see the Proverbs of Solomon, the son of David, king of Israel. Now, Solomon, if you remember, those of you that have grown up in church, or those of you that know or are familiar with the story, know that Solomon succeeded his father David as the king. And when Solomon was a young man, he felt all this responsibility thrust upon him and was completely unprepared for it. And so he asked God to give him an understanding heart, to give him wisdom, so that he would properly be able to lead God's people. God granted that request. In fact, God was so impressed with that request. He said, you haven't asked for fame and fortune. you asked for wisdom, and because you asked for wisdom, I will give you fame and fortune as well. Now, it's interesting that God did not give Solomon great fortune by just having treasure chests drop from heaven. I think a lot of times we kind of want that kind of prayer request answered. Let's be honest. We the manna from heaven in the children of Israel, we want money dropping from heaven. We pray and we ask God for help with our mortgage or help with our rent or help with whatever, and we want to open our door and see a big treasure chest out there. And this is from God, to you, and it's all the money there. That's the kind of prayer request that we want. That's the kind of prayer answer that we want. But God very rarely works that way. Very rarely. In fact, the whole manna from heaven thing was a one-time event. God very rarely works that way. The way God blessed Solomon with great wealth is God gave Solomon wisdom. And Solomon used that wisdom to then amass great wealth. And the same thing with his fame, and the same thing with the stability of Israel. But here's where Solomon talks about the importance of wisdom itself. He says, and really the whole purpose of the book of Proverbs, to know wisdom and instruction, to perceive the words of understanding, to receive the instruction of wisdom, justice, judgment, and equity, to give prudence to the simple, to the young man knowledge and discretion. A wise man will hear and increase learning, and a man of understanding will obtain wise counsel. To understand a proverb and an enigma, the words of the wise and their riddles. If you are a wise person, then you will know how to make the right choices. That's what's in view in the first reference to the word wisdom there. To know wisdom, to know the right choices. And instruction, to know and be able to understand and to learn. You will be able to perceive the words of understanding. You'll be able to perceive what's being taught you. Oftentimes when we sometimes sit under great wisdom or read great wisdom and we have a hard time understanding what's being meant there, Solomon is saying that as you grow in wisdom, you'll be able to receive more and more and to perceive and understand those words. To receive the instruction of wisdom, you'll be open to it. You'll be able to understand justice, to know what is right and what is wrong. You'll be able to make good judgment, to begin to make the right choices, but also to exercise good judgment in your relations with other people. You'll be able to do that. Equity, you'll be able to have an even equilibrium and be well composed in life. And you're not going to find yourself in a turbulent, constant state of turbulence. There'll be equity in your life, balance in your life. To give prudence to the simple. Now, it's interesting that word simple there, when you study the Hebrew and stuff, talks about basically someone being open. And now, normally we think it's good to be open-minded, and that's good. But you have to have a filter on your open mind. And basically, someone that is simple is easily misled. Someone that is simple is easily swayed. Someone that is simple is easily manipulated. And if you are prudent, however, if you're prudent, then you're not easily manipulated. To the young man, knowledge and discretion. Discretion is very important. To understand a proverb, I'm going to skip wise man will hear, but get back to that. Getting back to the benefits of wisdom here, skipping down. To understand a proverb and an enigma. The words of the wise and their riddles. Have you ever read a riddle? And I'm not talking about the fun little game riddles. Those are entertaining and they can be challenging. But I'm talking like when someone gives you a word of wisdom but does it in the phrase of a riddle, or when someone gives you a parable or a story and the meaning is not immediately evident. Solomon is saying that as you grow in wisdom, you'll be able to meditate on that and figure out what's being said, what's the meaning is behind that. And there's a lot of proverbs in the book of Proverbs like that, where there's metaphors used and word pictures used. And if you're not especially perceptive, you might fly over that and not even know what it's saying. And Solomon is saying that you need to be able to understand the words of the wise. You need to be able to understand their teachings. And so, the first choice that you have to make if you want to be successful in life, this is the number one choice that you got to make on a practical level if you want to be successful. Now, if you want to be a failure in life, then I guess this service is not going to be for you. This message will not be for you. But I hope none of us aspire to be failures in life. But if you want to be successful in life, you must make, number one, a foundational choice, and that is you must do what is said in Proverbs chapter 1 and verse 5, the beginning of the verse. A wise man will hear and increase learning. You must choose to listen more than you speak and increase your learning. If you are not open to instruction, if you are not open to learning, if you have no interest in learning anything more, then you are heading down a foolish and destructive path according to the Bible. You must be willing to learn. Now, in America, we've structured things out where from like the time a kid goes to kindergarten until they finish high school, and then later if they go to college, they're in structured learning. But quite often what happens in our society is that after a kid, well, this is assuming, of course, that the kid is committed to learning all during those years. And those of you who are in education know that's not always the case. But assuming that a child is engaged and actually learning and doing their homework and doing their lessons and listening to the teachers and learning all that, what often happens is they finish school and we think, learning is over. We've learned everything we need to know. I got my high school diploma. I got my college degree. Some people will go on and get a master's degree. I got my degree. I know everything I need to know. Now I can just focus on making money. I don't need to learn anymore. But wise people understand that learning is a lifelong endeavor. You should never, ever, ever stop learning. Even if you could be 110 years old, and I don't think there's anyone in our church that old, but you can be 110 years old and you should still be learning. You should learn until God calls you home. And guess what? I believe we're going to be learning in heaven too. Because when we get to heaven, we're not going to achieve omniscience in heaven. You know, we're going to be with the Lord, but we're going to be learning from the Lord about the Lord for the rest of eternity. Learning is going to be something that we do forever. And we should learn as much as we can now. If you want to have a good, successful life, you must be willing to commit to lifelong learning and never stop learning. I don't want to say this to condemn anyone or embarrass anyone, but I have met many people who have never read a book since they got out of school. I remember talking to one person who bragged, not in this church, but one person who bragged about not even reading a book in school, that somehow they got out of reading a book in school. Now, if you are the type of person that you don't believe in reading a book, and maybe you have trouble reading, but you can listen to a book at least, I'm including listening to a book when I say reading a book. If you're not someone that's interested in reading or listening to a book at all, then you cannot say you're committed to learning. You must be willing and able to learn. And so we're going to look at how it is we are to learn and what steps we can take in order to learn. But the title of my message this morning is Increase Learning. That is our first message in our series of Walking in Wisdom. We must be committed to increasing in our learning. The full verse in Proverbs 1 verse 5 says, "A wise man will hear and increase learning, and a man of understanding will attain wise counsel." I want to submit to you that the formula for learning is contained in this verse. If you really just break this verse down, everything that we need to do, foundationally speaking, is contained in this verse. You must listen, you must hear, you must receive information, hear. You must do that more than you speak. You must increase learning. That means you must be committed to actually learning. Those of you that are parents and or have been teachers, you understand that if a child does not want to learn, that child is not going to learn, right? It's a whole lot easier to teach a child that wants to learn than it is to teach a child that doesn't want to learn. And if you've got to try to convince that child through coercion or bribery or whatever to learn, then that takes a whole lot of energy right there. And then when the child finally, after all that, kicking and screaming, finally agrees to do some learning, there's not a whole lot of time left for instruction. That's the same thing is true in life in general, by the way. If we resist and fight against learning, then we are losing time. We only have a certain finite amount of time here on this earth. And we're losing time that God could be using to grow us in wisdom. And so we need to make sure that we are committed to increasing our learning. And that's a lifelong endeavor. And then it says, a man of understanding will attain wise counsel. That means, one, you're going to listen, you're going to be committed to increasing learning, and you're going to get wise counsel. Now, there are several ways to get wise counsel. Several ways. One, you could go talk to people who are wiser than you are. And there are plenty of people. There are plenty of people that I can go to, including in this church, who have more wisdom and life experience in different areas than I do. So there is always people that you can go to get wisdom. But you know what? You can get wisdom from people even after they're dead. If a person has written down some of their lessons and what they've learned, you can go and you can read that and you can get wisdom, wise counsel from someone who is dead. You know, you can read, for example, some of the memoirs of some of the great political and social leaders of our history and some of the great business leaders of our history. Many of them wrote things down. Many of them were quoted in their sayings, and you can get wisdom from them. You know that we have access to quotes from guys like Aristotle and Socrates and all kinds of people from the past, and you can read those quotes and you can learn from them and you can get that. But here's the best one of all. Every one of us here has access to the wisdom that God gave Solomon. We have it because Solomon wrote most of Proverbs. And so I want you to think about this for a moment. Solomon asked God for wisdom. God gave Solomon wisdom. Solomon used the wisdom that God gave him to make Israel into a mighty regional power, to build enormous wealth, to generate great fame, and to be incredibly successful in all the human and practical measures of life. And Solomon had that wisdom and decided to write down much of that wisdom in what are called wisdom sayings or proverbs. That is now accessible to us. You can access the wisdom of Solomon by reading the book of Proverbs. There was a gentleman by the name of Steve Scott. He's a Christian businessman. And many years ago, he was having trouble in his business. He was having trouble in his marriage. He was having trouble with his boss. In fact, Steve had been fired from about 6 different jobs, and did not have any kind of a future ahead of him. He was miserable. And he talked with a guy, and this guy is actually I'm drawing a blank on his name. It's not Gary Chapman, but it's another Christian marriage author and stuff. But he had a friend that wrote Christian marriage books and stuff like that, and so he talked with him. And this Christian friend said, I tell you what you need to do. He prayed about it and then got back to Steve with this advice. He says, I want you to read a chapter of Proverbs a day. I want you to read Proverbs every month from now until whatever. And I guarantee that in 2 years' time, you'll be smarter than all your bosses. And so Steve went ahead and did that. And what he found is his entire career turned around. And he is now today a multimillionaire. Now, I'm not promising you that if you read Proverbs, you're going to be a millionaire. Don't get me wrong. Because money is only one measurement of success, and there's no guarantee that God is calling you to the same pathway that he called Steve Scott. So I'm not telling you that you're going to necessarily get success at that level in money. But I will promise you this. If you will read the wisdom of Solomon on a regular basis, it'll change your life. And you will grow in ways that you never thought possible before. And you will become wiser and more effective and more successful in every area of your life. Now, if you want to be more successful as a husband or as a wife, if you want to be more successful as a parent, and Lord help you, you should want to be more successful in those areas. You ought to be more. You want to be more successful as a parent, I would hope. You want to be more successful as a spouse, I would hope, as a boyfriend, as a girlfriend. If you want to be successful in life, read Proverbs. If you want to be successful in your career and business, read Proverbs. If you want to be successful in being able to manage your anger and your temper, in being able to make the right choices, read Proverbs. The same wisdom that God gave Solomon, he has made it accessible to us today. We should be thankful for that. But instead we take it for granted, and quite often we don't take advantage of it, and that's a shame. So why is it that we don't do some of these things? You know, I said, I gave you the outline here. We should hear and listen. So why is it that we don't listen? Well, Solomon answers that in some of the other Proverbs of this book, and we're going to look at them now. The first one is one of my favorite Proverbs. It's Proverbs 18 and verse 13, and it says this: "He who answers a matter before he hears it, it is folly and shame to him." He who answers a matter before he hears it, it is folly and shame to him. How many times have you spoken before you've listened? How many times have you reacted emotionally to something without getting all the information? How many times have you jumped to a conclusion without having all the facts? This proverb is for you. This proverb is saying, if you fly off the handle, if you react, if you get angry, if you respond, if you start talking and spouting off without making sure you understand what's going on and making sure you understand the situation and what the other person is saying or whatever the case may be, then it is to your folly and shame. I know from personal experience, I have often shamed myself and embarrassed myself because I reacted emotionally in anger without taking the time to listen and hear and process what has been said to me. St. Francis of Assisi is credited with saying, and then Stephen Covey popularized this in his book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People: seek first to understand, then to be understood. Seek first to understand, then to be understood. Most people today want to express themselves. We live in a day and age where it's all about personal expression and self-expression. I mean, you go on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram, on Pinterest. I mean, social media right now, I can't even keep track of all the social media channels. And I'm hearing that there's social media like Vine and other stuff that I don't even know what it is, Snapchat and all kinds of other stuff. But we live in a day and age where it's all about self-expression. It's all about, the whole selfie thing. Taking a selfie and, it's people need to see me. It's all about me. It's getting my face out there. It's getting what I have to say out there. It's my opinions that matter. Express myself, express myself, express myself. That's the day and age that we live in. And I read a book recently, and I don't mean any disrespect to any young people here, because I think it frankly applies to multiple generations, okay? But this book was called The Dumbest Generation. And it was talking about, frankly, the millennials, but again, I think this applies to multiple generations here. But basically the argument is that this generation of Americans is all about expressing themselves and not taking any information in. They want to give their opinions, but they don't want to learn anything. They don't want to take the time to just be quiet and listen. Except for church on Sunday mornings. Except for church on Sunday mornings in America today, there aren't many venues where people actually come and sit and just listen. Think about that. In most of our culture and most of our society now, it's all about express ourselves, get our opinion out there. And quite often, even when we are listening, we're not really listening to understand. We're listening to respond. We're listening to debate. We're listening to okay, let me look for the weakness in this argument here, okay? And the person's spouting off a bunch of stuff, and we're just kind of filtering most of it aside, and we're only looking for the weaknesses, and we're kind of probing. And then someone says something, I'll get them on that person, and then they slam them on that. And then the argument gets worse and worse and worse. Most people, I'm sorry to say, when it comes to their opinions, depending on what buttons you can push, can be very stubborn. Very, very stubborn. We don't have any stubborn people here this morning, do we? But very, very stubborn. And when you're stubborn, you don't think that you need to learn anything. And here's what you got to be careful about. Once you get emotionally invested in an argument, it's very difficult at that point for you to open your mind up and say, I could be wrong on that. You ever notice that? The more you argue a position, the more committed you are to that position. Your ego and your pride comes into the situation. And then it's like, I'm not even going to admit weakness, because if I admit weakness, the other person's going to win. I can't let that happen. And so we got to make sure that we are willing to hear the case. Another way this plays out is, frankly, this is how gossip becomes so powerful. I want you to think about when you've heard stuff said about other people, how quick are you to believe that? How quick are you to believe what you hear about someone else when you haven't even talked to the other person that's the subject of that conversation? We're very quick to believe things. We're very quick to react to things. But Proverbs, Solomon is saying, stop, listen, focus on understanding. James says the same thing in his book, in his epistle, where James says, be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger. Quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger. Most people, when you think about it, are directly the opposite. Directly the opposite. Another thing that gets in our way is found in Proverbs chapter 1 and verse 22. How long, you simple ones, will you love simplicity? For scorners delight in their scorning, and fools hate knowledge. I could preach a whole sermon on this verse alone. This is a big one here, but a lot of people like life to be very simple. Excuse me. They don't want to grow. They don't have time for anything that's complicated. They don't want to deal with complexity. They just want it simple. Now, I understand that. How many of you are math fans? How many of you like math, right? As I've gotten older, I've gotten to be more appreciative of math, in all seriousness. But I hated math as a student. I hated it. And I would do everything I could to avoid taking a math class. When I was in college, I was almost successful. I had to take an introduction to logic, which basically had a lot of geometry in it. And I remember going in there thinking, this is supposed to be logic. Why is there math problems on the board? What's this math nonsense? And then I remember I had to take a statistics class. It was called a political analysis, and it was the government and politics version of statistics. And so there was a lot of numbers there, too, and I didn't like that too much. So I tried to avoid numbers as much as I could. I remember talking to a friend of mine, and I asked him, I said, why in the world do we have to take math? And he says, because it makes us think. And then he said, I don't like to think. And I said, I'm with you. It's like, but math does encourage us to think. And a lot of times we are impatient with anything that's difficult. If it's difficult, we don't want to do it. We want to follow the path of least resistance. And so we would rather be simple. We would rather stay, frankly, dumb than put ourselves in a situation where we have to stretch our comfort zone and actually do something difficult. But you know what? It's worth it in the end. You know, I remember when I was, again, in school, I also did not care much for science. I mean, I'm a history guy. You know, I like history and government and all that. English, I don't like science and math and everything. But I remember taking chemistry. I've told you this before, but I was taking chemistry, and I had to memorize the periodic table of elements. How many of you had to memorize the periodic table of elements? How many of you remember the periodic table of elements right now? Okay, I remember H2O, that's about it. But CO2, I think, yeah. But I have forgotten most of that, but I remember taking chemistry, and I remember saying to God, Lord, why am I doing this? Because I will never use this. I will never use this. My very first job out of college, I worked with the National Spa and Pool Institute, which is the trade association for the swimming pool and hot tub industry. And I was tasked with assisting and serving the Chemical Treatment and Process Committee. And I was in the meeting, and they're talking about pH balance and all this stuff. And I remember just shaking my head, okay, Lord, I get it. You know, God has a sense of humor, you know, and I have been the victim of his sense of humor many times. Make sure that you don't avoid learning. When God puts something in front of your path that you need to learn, do it. Ecclesiastes says, whatever your hand finds to do, do it with all your might. If it's something, I'm not saying you've got to be an expert in everything, but when you've got something right in front of your path that God's put in front of you, especially if it's something related to your calling, you need to do it to the best of your ability. You need to give it your all. You need to learn it. You know, for example, if you're in serving in the ministry here at the church, if you're teaching Sunday school, then you need to be the best Sunday school teacher you can be. You need to apply yourself and read books on how to teach Sunday school and learn how to teach Sunday school and learn how to be effective. And please don't use the excuse, Well, I've taught Sunday school since Julius Caesar was born, so I don't need to learn. No, you should be lifelong learning. If our treasurer was here, pray for their family. They're all sick with the flu right now, but if she was here, she'd tell you, I invest a lot in books and audio learning in my continuing education fund because I believe in continually learning. I should never get to the point as a pastor where I say, I don't need to learn anything else. I got this pastor thing down. I'm good. That doesn't work that way. You've got to continually learn and continue to grow. Whether you're in music ministry, teaching ministry, whatever the ministry is in the church, if you're serving God ultimately. And so you need to be committed to continual improvement, even if it's hard. But then it says, scorners delight in their scorning. Have you ever met a scorner? Some translations say scoffer. Have you ever met someone that scoffs and scorns? A scorner and a scoffer is someone that will resort to sarcasm and put-downs and insults in order to avoid learning. And we see this all the time in society today. Now, I have one of these things I do on the side a lot. I get on social media and I witness to people. I do this a lot. Some of you can follow some of my public discussions with people, but I do a lot of offline discussions where I'll put up a Bible verse or I'll put up a something, and invariably I'll end up getting in a conversation with someone on the side. Now, my family was making fun of me because on vacation I was actually doing this on Twitter, and we were sitting on the deck enjoying life, and it was great, watching the beach, and it was much warmer then, thank you, and we were, this is back in the summer vacation, and so we were, I was on my iPad, and I was on Twitter, and someone made a dumb comment about God, and I can't let that go, and so I responded, and I began to argue the evidence for God and everything, and this person did not respond specifically to any of my points. Instead, they responded with insults and mockery. And that, by the way, is typical of most of the critics of Christianity in the Bible and most of the atheists that you engage out there. Very few will take the time to humbly and intelligently discuss things. Most of them will just make fun of you and scoff at you. You've seen some TV comedians, for example. If you've been on TV talk shows like Bill Maher and other people, and they will scoff and scorn at religion, scorn and make fun of Christianity, and they'll get the laughter of the crowds behind them and stuff. But for me, I'm not swayed by any of that, because if you look past that and realize all they're doing is making fun, all they're doing is throwing out insults, there's no substance there. They're not directly engaging the evidence. They're not directly engaging the points. That is a scoffer. That is a scorner. And Solomon says that someone who scorns, someone who scoffs, is a fool on a path to destruction. So they may get the laughs. They may be able to live it up, so to speak. They may get people to kind of go along with them for a time. But in the end, there's emptiness there. It's deflection. Instead of confronting what they don't want to confront, they respond with an insult. They respond on the attack. Now, sometimes we do this in our own conversations. I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand, and please don't elbow your spouse or significant other right now, but have you ever been in a discussion, we'll call it, with your significant other, and the other person's making some good points, and you don't like the fact that they're making some good points? And so what is a tactic that we will often use when the person is making some good points that we don't really want to hear? We will attack with an insult or a jab or something to push a button to get the conversation derailed because we don't want to hear what's being said. Bible says, don't be like that. Don't be a scorner. Don't delight in your scorning. Fools hate knowledge. Now, you may not agree with the person, and that's okay. The person may be making an argument, and you may not even have an answer right there. And you could say, you know what, you're making some good points. I'll have to think about that and pray about that, and I'll get back to you. You don't need to respond with an attack. You can just be thoughtful and say, you know what, you're making some good points. Let me pray about that and think about that. Or you can ask questions. I've often found that's a great way to do it. Ask questions. Understand what the person's saying. Listen. Find out what they're saying before you just respond on the attack. Another reason why we don't do what Proverbs 1:5 says is found if you look in Proverbs 11, verse 14, or just you can look above me here. It says, where there is no counsel, the people fall. But in the multitude of counselors, there is safety. We need to seek after and attain after wise counsel. If we do not surround ourselves with wise counsel, we risk falling. We risk disrepute. We risk disaster, disappointment, frustration. We need to get wise counsel. One of the people that I go to for counsel occasionally is Ron Blankenship, who's the director of our Montgomery Baptist Association here. Very wise man, very smart man, very experienced. And I'll go to him and say, I need your help in the situation. What do you think? And, it's wise counsel. When Dr. Lee was the executive director of the BCMD, I had a good relationship with him, and I would go to him and get some wise counsel as well. I've got some people in this church that I go to for wise counsel. It's important to have that. It's important to be able to go and get someone that's not just going to give you, spout off an opinion, because this does not say that there's safety in the multitude of opinions. There's safety in the multitude of counselors. And there's nothing in Proverbs that says you've got to listen to every opinion that's thrown your way. Proverbs is saying you need to listen to godly counsel, wise counsel. And you need to know, if you're dealing with something, if you're trying to invest in real estate, for example, go talk to someone who has experience in real estate investing. If you are trying to invest in the stock market with your retirement portfolio or whatever, go to someone who's got experience and knowledge in doing that. If you're a Sunday school teacher just starting out, then you should go and talk to people who are experienced Sunday school teachers and get wisdom and advice from them. If you are starting out in the music ministry, you should go and talk to people who have experience in the music ministry and get counsel and advice from them. Seek out wise counsel. But a lot of times we don't do that because we have pride. And we think we've got it all under control. Sometimes people don't do it because of insecurity. They don't want to admit any weakness. When I was first starting out in my career, before the ministry, this was a problem for me. I didn't want to get counsel because I didn't want to reveal to people that I didn't know what I was doing. Now today, I have no problem telling people I don't know what I'm doing if I don't know what I'm doing. It's like, because it's not about an ego, it's about getting a job done. And if I'm ignorant on something, I have no problem telling you or other people, I don't know what I'm doing on this. I need help. That's being humble and authentic. And that's what you need to be willing to do, is get that wise counsel. There's safety in wise counsel. But here is another great proverb. I've been joking around with Dee on this one for a while, and she used it for one of the lessons that she did. This is a great one. Proverbs 12 and verse 1. Proverbs 12 and verse 1. Whoever loves instruction loves knowledge, but he who hates correction is stupid. Now, this is the Bible. My wife doesn't like it when I say the word stupid, but this is God's word, okay? All right. If you, according to Solomon, if you won't listen to correction, again, we're talking from context of wise counsel here, then you're, according to Solomon, you're being stupid. It's stupid not to listen to correction. You can't grow unless you're willing to be corrected. This is where accountability comes in. And if you're going to attain into wise counsel, you need to be willing to hear some things that you sometimes don't want to hear. You need to be willing to have someone come to you and say, you're making a mistake here. You're heading down the wrong path. There are many people that I've talked to that do not like to go see a counselor. That's bad business for people like Ronnie here, and stuff. But they don't like to go see a counselor. And you know why often that's the case? They don't want to open their life up to any correction. There are some people that will never even go talk to a pastor. They don't want to open their life up to any correction. If you're not willing to open your life up to wise counsel and correction, then according to Solomon, you're heading down a path of stupidity. God does not want that from you. As Frank Turek, great Christian author, says, Christians don't get brownie points for being stupid. Christians ought to be the wisest people among us. We ought to be seeking out wisdom from God. on a continual basis and asking Him for it. And God's going to put people in our life that sometimes are going to correct us and say things that we don't want to hear. I'm not telling you to do anything that I'm not willing to do myself. There's been a couple situations where people in this church, a couple deacons and a couple former deacons in our church that I've gone to for some counsel, and they've said some things that I didn't really want to hear, but I had to accept that correction and say, you know what, you're right. You're right. I'm making too big of an issue of this. You're right. I have to be willing to accept that. You do as well. We have to be willing to accept correction. And if we're not, then we're on a path of stupidity. Don't go on the path of stupidity. Be willing to accept the correction when it comes. But one of the reasons that we don't want correction is because we frankly get stubborn and we think that we know everything we need to know. Or we think that we're doing everything right. Now, there's a great line in the movie Facing the Giants, and where Grant, the head character, says, you can't judge yourself by your intentions and judge other people by their actions. In other words, we have a tendency that just because we think in our minds that we're doing the right thing, we have the best of intentions. Therefore, we don't want to open ourselves up to any correction because we think we're right. But Solomon would tell you that you may be right, but that doesn't mean you're handling the situation in the right way. It doesn't mean that your results are the best. You may be correct, but there's a right way and a wrong way to handle things. You know, wisdom not only tells you what to say, but wisdom will tell you when to say it and how to say it. Kids know this, that there's a time to approach their parents with a request and a time not to. And if you've been in a loving romantic relationship or a marriage for any length of time, you know there's a time to discuss something with your significant other and a time not to. There's a time where it works and a time where you just want to stay away from that territory. And so that's wisdom. That's wisdom to understand that. And so you have to be able and willing to do that. So make sure that you're always willing to receive correction. Make sure that you seek after wisdom. I want to return to our main verse here. A wise man will hear and increase learning, and a man of understanding will attain to wise counsel. This is a verse I would encourage you to memorize, a verse I would encourage you to make your verse for the year, frankly, because what better New Year's resolution can you make than that you're going to learn more this year? There are great testimonies that I've read from people who started out a year and they said, you know what, this year I'm going to learn a new language. This year I'm going to learn to do something different. This year I'm going to grow in this particular area. You should be able to look back when we get to 2019. You should be able to look back on 2018 and recognize that you learned things that you didn't know before and that you became a better person as a result of it. You know, there are many Christians, for example, that aren't comfortable learning how to share their faith. They're not comfortable sharing their faith. Well, you know what? There's all kinds of resources out there and books that you can read to help you better share your faith, to help you better deal with those conversations. There's a lot of people that are struggling in their marriages. You know what? There's all kinds of great wisdom out there that you can get access to on how to be a better husband or father or mother, or how you can be a better wife. There's all kinds of great wisdom out there. Access it, learn in those areas. Make sure that you're doing that. And so make sure that you are seeking out that wisdom. As the praise team comes forward to close us out, I want to take us back 3,000 years ago to Solomon himself. When Solomon went to the Lord in prayer, Solomon had a heavy heart because Solomon understood the burden that had been thrust upon his shoulders. He was now going to be the king, and he was going to have all this responsibility. And he knew that other people's lives, other people's welfare, other people's livelihood now rested on him. And if he made poor decisions, he could ruin the entire country. And he knew that he was unprepared for this. And so he asked God, Lord, please give me wisdom. I believe that one of the reasons why many of us as Christians today, we don't ask God for wisdom or seek out after wisdom is because we don't appreciate the responsibilities that we have in our lives. If you are not growing in wisdom, you can hurt people in your life. If you're not growing in wisdom, it's not just you that's being affected by that, but it's the people around you that's being affected by that. You have to be committed to this because it's not ultimately about yourself. It's about being the person that God has called you to be. Solomon needed wisdom in order to do the calling that God had placed on your life. Every single person in this room has a calling that God has put on your life. At the very least, that calling includes being a good husband, a good father, a good church member, a good witness for Christ. It includes being a good wife, a good mother. It includes being a servant in the church. At the very least, your calling includes those things. Your calling also includes however the Lord has laid on your heart to provide for your own needs and your family's needs. You have a calling on your life. That calling should be seen as a sacred trust that God has given you and said, I want you to do this. I remember when Jay and I brought Jennifer home for the first time, and later Jonathan, and we looked at it and we were like, this is an awesome responsibility. And I've joked about it in the past, but it was serious. We literally did not have a clue what we were going to do. It's like you actually let us leave the hospital with this baby. What were you thinking? That is an awesome responsibility, just being a parent. Why would you resist getting wisdom when there's more people involved than just yourself? It isn't just, life is not about you ultimately. It's about you serving God. And it's about God using you to touch the lives of other people. You need wisdom to do that effectively. Increase your learning. Seek out wisdom this new year. Father, I ask that this morning that we would all take seriously the sacred trust of our calling, take seriously the responsibility placed on us as Solomon did 3,000 years ago. Father, I pray that we will ask you for wisdom and that we will take advantage of the resources for wisdom that are right before us. That we will make the right choices in our life because we know that our life isn't just about us. We affect others with our lives. And the choices we make can hurt others or can help others. The choices we make can inflict pain or they can bring a light to people. So, Father, I pray that you will help us to know that this is serious, that we need to acquire wisdom so we can be the best servant of you that we can be. Father, if anyone here today has a burden that they need to lay at your feet or needs some godly wisdom and counsel from you, I pray that they will take this opportunity and this invitation to receive that. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.